Welcome to the first part of a video series we're doing here at Transparent Technology. My name is Kane Fitzgerald, I'm the lead consultant down at Transparent Technology. I'm joined today by the lovely Sarah Persov.
Hi.
For those of you that don't know, Sarah, I'll let you actually tell them a little bit about what you do.
So I am an engineering team lead at Dojo, a fintech. Now what that actually means is I'm a people manager and I'm the lead software engineer, but I'm also the head of women in tech at the company, which is something that's kind of organically come through the work I've been doing in the company. So, yeah.
And I think that's effectively what we're trying to do with this video series, right? We're trying to connect with local companies, speak with people like Sarah and, talk about hot topics within the industry, but maybe some of the more kind of, I guess, issues we're going to call them. I mean, I don't know how we can dress it up any better, but, asking the questions, what could companies be doing as well as obviously local governments, universities, etc., to, in this particular part, encourage more women within the tech industry. And hopefully Sarah's story will inspire and maybe identify some areas which we as businesses and recruiters alike could be doing to improve and making it a more welcoming industry.
Yeah, definitely.
So to start off, Sarah, I think it's probably good to kick it off with you telling us a little bit about your story, really, how you got into it.
Yeah, so I didn't really get into it in the more traditional sense of always knowing that this is what I wanted to do. I, in fact, was really bad with computers and tech in general. I didn't do IT at GCSE. It wasn't available at the school I was at. It was available at the boys' school, but not the girls' school.
Classic.
And I was very much into the humanities. I loved classics, English literature, history. I really enjoyed writing, and I did a bunch of work experience with things like law, journalism, physical anthropology, and realised they weren't for me. Some of it I really enjoyed as a hobby, but I wouldn't want to do full time. And part of it was that I realised there just wasn't really much career prospects in some of it. So during my college, which I had to do over 3 years due to health problems, I kind of had to sit down one day and go, what is realistic with my health? What is it that I actually enjoy doing?
Yeah.
And it boiled down really to problem solving. I really loved maths, but I was really bad at it. I just thought I got it, sat down to an exam and flopped.
You and me both.
One day, literally, I Googled degrees related to problem solving in maths, and computer science came up. And I didn't actually associate that with coding or software engineering or software development or anything like that.
I suppose back then it was probably one of those kind of anomalies, right? You didn't really quite know what it was.
Yeah, like it briefly mentioned learning to code, and I didn't even really know what that was. But really, I kind of looked at it and went, well, computers seem like magic. It would be interesting. I'll learn a lot.
Yeah.
Not long after, about 3 or 4 months after, I then met my partner, who was a software engineer and had just graduated. And I was really fortunate with the timing of that because he was able to actually show me some coding.
Okay.
And I found it infuriating and absolutely loved it.
Yeah.
And that's kind of the summary of being a software engineer, really. And I then decided that this was for me. So I went to university, I went to Queen Mary. I really didn't like any of the academia side of it. I'm not an academic. I loved the coursework. I loved the practical side of it. And started making apps during my first year, which I did in C# instead of like the native language, because there was a library that allowed for cross-platform development. And I just absolutely fell in love with back-end software engineering and could not get the hang of front end. It just doesn't click in my head. I'm really bad at it, and it's still magic to me. And then essentially my kind of uni, I did internships, I did work experience that focused on back end software engineering, and just it clicked for me.
Yeah. So, I mean, that kind of takes me back to my next point, really. I know we kind of spoke off camera about, a statistic what I found pretty surprising was that it's not so much the fact that we're struggling to get women in the industry, it's getting them to stay.
Yeah.
And what was that statistic you mentioned to me?
Yeah, so I read a few months ago, I can't remember the source, but I remember reading that something like women are 4 to 5 times more likely to leave the tech industry within the first 5 years, I think, of entering it.
Is that compared to men?
Yeah.
Yeah. So I think that was going to bring me to my next question, really. Obviously, during your time at university, what made you stay the course? Because I can imagine that was a pretty much male-dominant class,
Yeah.
right?
So when I first started on my course, it was about 20% or 25% women. At the end of my first year, it was down to 15%. And then out of the about 220 or slightly more people who graduated,
Yeah.
there was only 7, I think, or 8 other women who actually graduated. And a big thing was, some people, it just wasn't for them.
Yeah.
But a big thing really was that the culture was exhausting.
Really?
I mean, even in my first year of uni, I was having to deal with, guys my age saying really ridiculous things like, oh yeah, well, women's brains just don't think. Well, they didn't say women actually, they said girls.
Right.
Girls just
Yeah.
can't think in the right way. They don't have the logical capabilities for coding, things like that. And I always found it quite funny when I'd then be sitting there, finish my coursework way earlier than them, but I had to be in the labs, and they would come and ask me for help, and I'd be
Yeah.
like, sorry,
Vintage, yeah.
I'm a girl, I can't. And they just literally didn't care that they'd said that ridiculous sexist stuff around me. It just never clocked that I would hear it.
And did your lecturers have nothing to say about that? And that was going to be my next question, really.
They never said it in front of lecturers.
Yeah, of course.
They would say it about other like female TAs, but who would then call them out on it. But a big thing is, oh, they're still learning, they're still developing and stuff like that. And I think it gets even harder when you then go into work experience. The kind of first exposure you get to a professional environment can really determine and shape everything for you.
Big time.
And, I faced various different levels of sexism. And a lot of the problem is, a lot of it is very passive aggressive. And, you can't easily call out because they could say, oh, it's not sexism, it's just this or it's that, and explain it away. But it is very, very much still sexism.
And I can imagine a lot of it is almost like unconscious bias as well, right? Like I know it's something you've touched upon, which is a very big thing that you're seeing a lot in the industry where people just aren't aware about the fact that they are being sexist, right?
Yeah, I think I was recently told that the phrase unconscious bias now has a stigma, which I found surprising because it kind of is, people seem to not want to be open to the fact that they might have bias.
And they don't want to own it effectively, do they?
No, but that is the problem. A lot of people who, society, culture has changed really quickly in terms of women in society. And unfortunately, in a lot of places, that hasn't fully migrated into, or not migrated, but translated into how young girls and boys are brought up, expectations, and people older than me as well still having an idea of women being housemakers or childcare or being quieter and not making waves, and you still get comments of, it's not that I'm being a boss or direct, it's being rude or bitchy.
It's a massive culture shift, right? I think that's kind of where we're at with it at the minute. Like, I think the conventional sense of what a woman, I should say, is expected to do, we're trying to erase that whole stigma, and companies are now trying to, I think some of them are trying to make an active change. I do feel like a lot of it is just tick boxing, and I know that's something we'll get onto as well. But what I did want to ask is, obviously just running it back to your time at university, were there any kind of mentors or role models during your time or even during your internship that, made you think this is worth sticking out, I can carve out a really good career for myself?
So I didn't have any actually female mentors, but what I did have was some really strong male allies.
Yeah.
And during my internship in particular, I had someone who genuinely stood up for me and cared for me.
Yeah.
And when I'd be struggling, they would essentially like say, it's not you, it's them.
Yeah, and that's so vital, right? Having that support network around you to, make you feel like you're not alone in this, right?
Yeah, and I think a big thing as well is that the culture isn't going to change without men changing and allies and calling them out. And that's exactly what he did. And I also met one of my best friends there, and we often joke that we trauma bonded from crying in toilets, which
It's a positive spin to put on it.
Yeah, but everywhere I've ever worked or interacted, I've been really fortunate that I have found an ally and someone to stand up and actually sometimes protect me.
Yeah.
Now, at university, that was a lot harder because it's not the same type of thing as a, work environment. But also, I think a big thing was that I am inherently stubborn and pig-headed and have, due to different medical conditions, spent a lot of my life in rooms where me and my mum would be the only women there, and we'd be having to fight for my health and stuff like that. And, I think that translated into me not caring that I'm the only woman, or not caring about, and not to say that I always didn't care, and it's a strength that I've built over time. But when I kind of hit that kind of brick wall, most of the time it would just really annoy me and make me angry and kind of fuel me to not prove them wrong, but go further than that.
Of course.
So,
yeah.
No,
I think it's one of those things where you've kind of had to take, I guess, a negative experience into your health and almost turn it into a superpower, right? Like you're using it to kind of challenge the pig-headed people, I suppose, in the industry, and having that support network there also, where you've got allies, as you call them, to really stick up and fight your corner. And I think you're right. The stigma and the whole, I guess, negative, I guess, for lack of a better word, I don't know what I'd call it. So for lack of a better word, you're going into an industry that is going to be dominated by males, right? So that was what I wanted to kind of touch upon with you. I know you're doing a lot of stuff outside of your role with Dojo at the minute, right? Where you're trying to encourage more women into the industry, doing a lot of talks and being a bit of an activist. I mean, can you tell us a little bit about that and how companies can, be using incentives and people like yourself to...
Yeah, definitely. I think this kind of role for me came really organically at Dojo, where my manager recognised this is something I was really passionate about and put me forward for a talk that was hosted at work. And that was about overcoming obstacles in your career with a focus on sexism. And I approached that talk by just sitting down and going, what are the key things, and what is the point of this talk? And the point is to empower women. Because a lot of women aren't empowered to speak up and, aren't empowered to leave, aren't empowered to fight for what they deserve. And I think that I'm really lucky that I've got and always had that support system and that fire that I can recognise when I'm being mistreated, or recognise this disparity of power and how hard it is for women of all ages to be in that industry and have that kind of fuel my passion to fight it.
And not just industry, and I suppose it's also to be on the same level playing field as males, right? And that could be things like, equal pay, status, roles.
Well, before you even get into working, women do not start at an equal playing field when you start a job. So many people, sometimes women, who have essentially had to adapt and drank the Kool-Aid, so to speak, to survive in the industry, have this idea that especially young women are only getting jobs due to positive diversity hires. And this was a big thing at university when I got that internship. So, you know, at university, I actually lost a few friends when I got that internship. And I actually was contacted about that internship. I didn't apply. And these were all male friends who had applied and got rejected. And they essentially said, well, the only reason you got that job is because you're a woman in tech, you know, you have a service dog, you are, you know, so you tick that box, you have pink hair, so you stand out, so you look quirky and good for advertisements, you tick that box, you know, you can tick all the boxes. And these were friends who I had spent countless hours helping with their engineering coursework and teaching them how to do things. And as soon as they didn't get picked and a woman did, regardless of how, you know, they hadn't shown any sexist tendencies up until that point, instantly, the idea of rejection meant it has to be because they are the ones being discriminated.
And that's to stroke their own egos, I think, right? So they couldn't kind of come to grips with the fact that, you know, a woman might actually be good within the industry. And
it, you know, that kind of then comes back to the positive diversity problem. Not positive diversity, positive discrimination.
That's it.
Problem, because the whole thing with that was that it was a push for companies to start getting more diverse hires and actually having employees who represent the diversity of society. And unfortunately, some companies didn't do it the right way, which is during the hiring process, when you're trying to find candidates to interview, you put an active effort into getting a diverse pool of candidates. But what some companies have done is instead rejected candidates on the basis that they don't fit into the group they're looking for.
And I think I wanted to touch up on that because obviously from us on the other side of the on the fence, where we're obviously engaging with the market and trying to, I think obviously we're looking for people that are going to fit the role, right, regardless of who they are and what they do. But how can we as recruiters, I suppose, reach into these different demographics where we're actually actively being able to hire more diverse hires for our clients?
I think that's a really hard thing to solve. You know, things like LinkedIn have made life a lot easier. But a really big thing is that, especially from my experience as a woman and female friends I have and stuff, a lot of it goes off word of mouth. And a lot of the time, the tick boxing side of it comes in, where, you know, companies talk about how they really care about DEI, and you're like, well, you say that.
What are you doing
what
about it?
What are you actually doing? And that becomes really evident when the recruiters themselves don't know, because that means that it wasn't important enough for the company to actually make it clear to you, like, yeah, we have a women in tech community, or we have, you know, this community, that community, we're doing this training, or we encourage people going to talk. You know, there are so many different things to show that you actually care, instead of just going, oh yeah, this is the popular thing at the moment. And especially as with the tech industry at the moment being a bit tumultuous and layoffs and stuff, that can end up being dropped when they're like, okay, well, it's less important to do that tick boxing right now. But actually, this is the time to show that you do genuinely care, because, you know, fine, you might have to wait slightly longer to have a group of candidates to interview, whilst recruiters do find a more diverse pool, but it's about getting the right person for the role. And the whole thing with the positive discrimination is that once you have those candidates to interview, that's when there is no more positive discrimination. Like, it doesn't matter about gender or ethnicity or race or anything. That's once you actually start interviewing people, that's when it goes to, are you the right person for this role, regardless? And, you know, I think that for me, what's great at Dojo is the fact that they've organically grown me into this role. This wasn't something they planned on doing when I got hired.
And I think you can just tell when it's forced sometimes, right? Like you can really read it out. And I think that's something I wanted to get you to maybe identify for some of the aspiring people that are looking to get into the industry. I mean, what would you say are some red flags when people are interviewing at companies within the industry?
So I think a red flag is when people don't know or won't tell you what percentage of women there are. And what I mean by that is that it might not be a great number, but it's also about not shying away from that and acknowledging unfortunately we only have 12 or 13% of the people in tech who are women. However, what we're doing is we're partnering with people, we're, investing into early career programs that have a focus on bringing more women into it, or we're going with apprenticeship schemes that focus, there's lots of different things that can be done. And it's also about not just doing one thing. So if the only thing you're doing is going, oh, well, we're going to partner with a company that focuses on advertising jobs to women. Great. What else are you doing? Because you can't solve a problem in only one way. And also, you have to actually make sure that the team you're hiring into and the culture in your company is ready for diversity. Because if it's really, really male dominated and you've got a young woman who isn't as confident or isn't as self-assured or doesn't have the same level of support, you're essentially setting her up to fail because you're putting her into an environment where people haven't been trained on how to, lead young women or don't know how to handle maternity leave.
Which comes back to that statistic, I suppose, right? Where it's like, it's all well and good getting people through the door, but what are you doing to actively keep them there, right? And again, I'm sorry to interrupt, but I just wanted you to touch upon maybe something that the government could be doing and companies that can incentivize people to take a role within the industry. But more importantly, with that focus on women, I've seen obviously there's, like you mentioned, apprenticeships and schemes, but through your own experiences, is there anything that you think should be in place?
So I think that there needs to be more of a focus on the different ways you can get into tech. So for me, I'm not academic, right? I found university really hard because I don't like exams. I know some universities now don't do exams. They only do coursework. I would have loved that. But I'm quite jealous actually. But, actually advertising these apprenticeships to people. And also, I don't know if it's changed, but when I was first starting at uni and in college, and sometimes I still get it now, that people seem to think that you have to be really good at maths for computer science. And
I certainly did anyway.
I do not know my greater than or less than signs. I have a problem with it. I have to do the whole crocodile thing. I get it wrong about 30% of the time. And yes, those signs are used a lot in coding. That hasn't stopped me becoming a lead software engineer.
And how long have you been doing it for the people that don't know?
Okay, so how long have I been doing it for? That's a good question. So I started university in 2016. I graduated in 2019. So I've been doing, I'm going into my 5th year as actually actively working.
And for the people that don't know, I mean, to be in a position where Sarah is now within, 5 years?
Yes.
It's an impressive feat, right? I think, without blowing 4 or 5 years and you are where you are, without stroking your ego too much. I mean, you've climbed the ladder quick. And I think that's what a lot of people don't realise. You can really, I think, kick on and do well in an industry that you're passionate about. Despite the fact that it is male dominated, right?
I think that I am an anomaly to an extent because I'm incredibly passionate about it. It helps that my partner is in the same industry, so we talk shop a lot. I've learned from him a lot. And back-end software engineering, it just clicks in my head. It's almost how I think. And also, I stand out. People are going to remember me.
Of course.
And I'm vocal, I'm loud, I'm opinionated, and I also listen a lot. And what I mean by that is when people who are a lot more experienced than me are talking about problems, I'm actively listening and paying attention so that I can learn from that. But I'm also very okay with going, I have no idea. And I do that a lot where I'll be asked, how do I solve this problem? Or how should we do this? And I go, I don't know. However, from other experiences, this is what I would suggest, but I need to do more research.
Yeah.
And advice I would actually give to women in the industry is use the fact that you're a woman. Stand out. The same way that, you know, it used to be that people got promotions because they'd go golfing with their boss on the weekend.
Yeah.
You know, go to the pub after work. It doesn't mean you have to drink. Go with socials. You know, use the fact that people are going to know that you are there because you are the only woman there to your advantage, because progression in your career is about not just what you do and how you do it, but who you know.
Yeah.
Because if no one actually sees you and knows that you're doing fantastic work, then you're not going to be put forward because they don't know about it. You have to, you know, however hard it is and uncomfortable it is, you really have to actually kind of sing your own praises, bring up with your boss, like, yeah, I fixed this really hard problem in like a day. How great is that? You know, you have to be your own champion and your own cheerleader and learn how to toe that line between not coming across as really arrogant.
Yeah.
Like, you need to know how to show off and celebrate your achievements, but also be humble about it.
Yeah, certainly. And I think it just goes back to that thing where we need to empower more young women to not be afraid to make those mistakes, because I think, like, ultimately with any new job you're not going to know it all, right? So I think if you can just, you know, take pride in the fact that there are going to be mistakes along the road, but, you know, if that makes you into the better engineer that you plan to be, then
like, nobody's perfect, and owning up to your mistakes is one of the most important things that you can do in tech, because it's not just showing that you are not this perfect rock.
Yeah.
You know, it makes you human, but also it's a teaching moment for everyone. You know, I lead a team. I have quite junior people in my team at the moment. When I mess things up or accidentally, you know, go into production and it brings down a website, I own up to it, and I use it as a moment to explain, how did this happen? How can we stop that in the future? What is it that I missed? What is it that they may have missed?
Yeah.
And it's nothing inherently bad when, you know, mistakes are mistakes.
Yeah, exactly.
It's about learning from them and owning up to them.
Of course. And I think I just wanted to touch upon, I guess, some of the obstacles that you faced when you started out early in your career, right? I mean, obviously, you know, you're coming into an industry, you know it's going to be male dominated, you know you're going to be critiqued probably harder than your peers, right?
Yeah.
I think, you know, for the people listening, could you maybe go into that a little bit?
Yeah. So something that I faced, and I know a lot of other women faced, is that people expect women to pick things up way quicker than their male colleagues.
Why do you think that is?
I think there's a couple of things. One is that a lot of people still have this feeling that they only got hired because they're a woman. So they're like, well, you have to prove yourself.
Yeah.
Part of it also is that women don't really get given the opportunity to fail. And what I mean by that is that if something does go wrong or it takes you longer to learn something, I found that, like, often male colleagues were allowed that. Whereas with me and other women I know, it was, well, why aren't you getting that quicker? Like, it's still this idea that women have to be superwomen. You can't just be average. You can't just be normal. You can't be bad at something. You have to be amazing. Otherwise, what's the point of you being here? Why aren't you just staying at home and having a family and all that stuff? And that is something that I found was really hard And also the fact that because you do stand out, there is so much more focus. So, you know, if you're in a bigger team and you've got someone who doesn't really talk much in updates and stuff like that, because they're not talking, because they don't stand out, they don't have that focus, but you do. So because you're in the focus more, there's an expectation for you to be amazing quickly. But I also think, unfortunately, part of it is the expectation that women put on themselves, because to have made it that far in the industry, often you've had to fight. You know, you've had to, it's very rare for someone to enter their first job in the industry and have not faced any sexism. So you've had to fight to get there, which means almost to an extent, I think you feel like you can't just be good. You have to be amazing. And then you get imposter syndrome. And that means, you know, and it's something I've suffered really badly with at different times. And when I joined Dojo, my manager spent a few weeks getting me to unlearn that behavior. Where he was like, okay, this is problematic. We need to address this. We need to get you to get rid of that mentality, because we wouldn't have hired you if you were an imposter.
And it stops you being the best version of yourself, right?
Yeah, and it's also like being kind to yourself, letting yourself mess up, and letting yourself actually just be human. You know, a big thing I think is that I often feel like women are not given the same baseline human respect that men are given, especially early on in their careers. And what that then translates into is all the different microaggressions and passive aggressive ways that women are treated, that often the people who are treating them that way don't actually realize it. But it's because there's that kind of subconscious difference in like respect. And that's the hardest problem, and one of the bigger problems currently, I think, in the industry as people are progressing and learning, is that acknowledging your own problematic behavior, the way you're talking, the way you're not talking, behavior, exclusion, things like that, you have to be critical of yourself and be okay with realizing that you may have messed up, and then going, how do I fix that? But also calling out other people. And this is a really big thing, because you might realize that, oh, your colleague is treating somebody not in a great way, but you're not going to call them out because that's none of your business or whatever. But all that's doing is actually you're being on the side of the oppressor there, because by not saying anything, you are normalizing that behavior and making it okay. As soon as someone goes, that's not okay, that brings attention to it and makes you uncomfortable.
And that's what I kind of wanted to touch on then. Like for us as men in the industry, right? What could we be doing when we see things like that, where, you know, these sexist remarks, and maybe we've noticed someone in the workplace is maybe being unconsciously biased to two women, right? What can we be doing to make it a more approachable industry for women?
So one of the big things here is actually telling them and doing it in, you know, private. Because if you call them out in front of a group of people, that's obviously going to make them defensive if you're calling them out. It's about pulling them aside and acknowledging that, you know, hey, I don't think you realised how that might have come across. Letting them be defensive for a few minutes, but then bringing it back to, like, you know, in the future, I don't think you should do that. Maybe you should go and apologise to them, and kind of almost gently calling them out. If then they continue to still not, being less gentle, and then eventually, you know, you might have to go to HR about it.
Because I think that's something like the vast majority of people probably aren't aware that they are being sexist a lot of the time. And I think it's like you said, right, if you call them out in public, they are just instantly going to get their back up. But if people are prepared to have those hard conversations and just say, look, I'm pretty sure you didn't mean it to come across that way, but it did. And then I think people are just a lot more informed when engaging with others
Yeah.
in the workplace, right?
But the other side of that is also pulling the women aside and saying, look, I recognize that, I saw that,
Yeah.
that's not okay. And, you know, I've already dealt with it.
Yeah.
And what's important there is that so many women are expected to just brush it aside, normalize it. That's just the way the industry is, stuff like that. And all that does is reinforce internally that they don't deserve that respect, that they don't, you know, that they should be so appreciative of even being there.
Yeah.
And it just becomes this self kind of, not self-fulfilling, but I don't know.
It's just contributing to the problem, right?
Yeah.
Yeah.
And it makes it that they doubt themselves. And this is a really big part of the kind of activism work that I'm started doing
Yeah.
and want to continue doing is empowering women.
Because that's obviously speaking out there, that's now like a big part of your day to day, right? For people that don't know, obviously Sarah's responsible for managing the team, and obviously she works as a product manager for her company Dojo, but more recently you've dedicated a lot of time to being an activist within the space. So could you tell, for the people that are listening, you know, what that involves and what you're looking to do moving forward this year?
Yeah. I'm a lead software engineer, not product manager.
Lead software engineer.
I also have to do a bit of product management, obviously, in that role.
Yeah.
But so the agreement at the moment is 30% of my time is dedicated to women in tech.
And that was agreed between you and Dojo?
Yes,
So
and that was actually proposed by Dojo.
Yeah.
So what that actually means, though, is the kind of way I've been approaching it is that it's a two-pronged approach. It's a top-down and bottom-up. So the top-down is working with execs, running training sessions, bringing them into the world that they are not aware of,
Yeah.
and bringing them the actual stories that are happening and not letting them shy away from it. And, you know, partnerships, procedures, policies, stuff like that. And then the flip side is the community, and that comes from building a community, empowering the women in that community and gathering the data, finding out what are the women actually experiencing that I can then, you know, anonymize, aggregate and use to then build the policies, build the things that are going to be happening. And, you know, it's a lot of work, especially as I'm leading a team. I'm, you know, I'm in quite an important part of the company. I'm doing a lot of really fun, exciting green projects, which take a lot of planning and design and stuff. And then that's a very analytical part of me. And then switching into the more vulnerable, raw side of it and having to, you know,
wear a lot of
balance
hats,
that.
essentially, like spinning a lot of plates and obviously going from the kind of more pragmatic way of your day-to-day job and then actually getting to the kind of humanity side of things is
and
it's hard, right?
it can be really tiring, but it's really important to me.
Yeah.
And what's really fantastic is the company have, you know, change is already starting from the work I've been doing. They want me to even potentially go to 50-50. And none of this has been me saying, I want to do this. This is the company going, we want you to do this. And if I'm okay with it, obviously.
Yeah.
And a really big thing is, you know, I did a talk that's on YouTube, and that was all about empowering women, and it was to a live audience. And the feedback I had after was really, really, in a good way, overwhelming. Because so many women were coming up to me and saying, you know, they felt really empowered by it. They'd never thought about it that way, that they felt heard for the first time, that they felt recognized and things like that. And when you've got a diverse group of people who are empowered, you're going to have such good productivity. You're going to have way better work come out of them because of that diversity and that, you know, different ideas, different backgrounds. And it also means that you're not going to end up in a situation where people won't call other things out. Because if people aren't empowered to stand up for themselves and others, they're not going to be empowered to stand up to, let's say, bad management. They're not going to be empowered to stand up, you know, say, I think we should actually do it a completely different way. And it has such a big knock-on effect.
Of course, yeah,
And
it almost snowballs, right?
when you have a diverse group of people, that's going to bring more diversity because they're going to know people. Word of mouth is so important. And, you know, whenever people ask me, oh, you know, what would you say about working at Dojo? I'm always like 100%.
Yeah.
Because of how fantastic of an experience I've had. Whereas if I'd had a bad experience, I would not be telling them to work there. And that is really the thing that I think companies need to realize, is that it's not just about recruiters, it's about word of mouth and how that interacts. You know, if there's companies that use recruitment firms, and I've got a friend who's looking, and I know that a recruitment firm is actually going to only be working with companies that genuinely care, then I'll say, let me set you up with someone.
Exactly.
Whereas if it's a tick boxing exercise, why would I?
Yeah, and it's just so important to have those relationships, right, internally with the companies, but also externally with the people you choose to engage with when you are looking elsewhere. And it's something, you know, I think we as recruiters can be more mindful of, you know, if we're taking specifications for jobs for companies, right, we can ask them what are they proactively doing to, you know, encourage and, you know, improve their diverse workforce. And, you know, being able to weed out, is it just a check box exercise or do they genuinely mean it? And I think, you know, you're a brilliant case study to show that, you know, Dojo, for example, are proactively looking to change that for the better.
Yeah.
So just moving kind of forward, I suppose the big question is, what's next for you?
So something that has been really big for me with the work I've been doing at Dojo is that they have encouraged me and given me the push I needed to not just do this within Dojo. You know, they're encouraging me to go and do talks like this, do public speaking, and not just on behalf of Dojo. I'm here on behalf of myself. And that's a really critical thing because I've got the full support because they recognize how important this is to the industry. And I want to, you know, I've been told that I have a big impact, that I'm a good public speaker, and I really enjoy it. I really want to make a genuine difference in the industry for women. So kind of my longer term plan is to continue being a software engineer. You know, I might not stay in management, I might go down more the staff route because I love software engineering more than, you know, necessarily people management, but also becoming a genuine activist and just like genuinely working within the industry, becoming a figure within the industry where I can hopefully improve at least some people's lives. You know, I'm not here to change the world, but even if I help a bit, that's a positive impact. So, yeah.
Well, look, I just wanted to thank you so much for obviously taking the time to speak with us today. For anyone that would like to obviously, I guess, reach out to Sarah effectively and, you know, maybe just pick her brain a little bit. She obviously runs a blog. You can find her on LinkedIn. What we'll do is we'll plug in the little description there where you can find her. Really appreciate your time, Sarah, and hopefully this won't be the last one. I'm always available and will respond to messages and stuff. So yeah, definitely. Thank you so much for the opportunity. Cheers. Take care, guys. All the best.